September 2, a meeting of the Metropolitan Policy Committee. And today's meeting is being held virtually, and we do have a call-in number for the public. And the notice was given. So at this point, I'll invite Mr. Thompson to give a listing of all the people who are on the call.
Thank you, Commissioner. In no particular order, I'm going to read them as they appear on my screen and then ask for those that I don't identify to identify themselves. So in addition to myself, I see Drew Pfefferly, staff from LCOG, Sid Schoaf, staff from LCOG, Tim Garner, which I believe is actually Neil Moyer, Metro Television, broadcasting this, Teresa Brand, LTD, Tom Boyette, City of Springfield, Dan Collister, LCOG, Councilor Piscinari from Springfield, Rachel Dorfman, staff from LCOG, Franny Brindle, ODOT, Carl Springer from DKS, Mayor Venice, Emma Numa from Springfield, Sasha Vartanian from Lane County, Bill Johnson, ODOT, Ellen Courier, LCOG, Commissioner Sorensen, Commissioner Burney, Ann Heath from Coburg, Andrew Martin from Lane Transit District, Carl Ye, LTD, Councilor Van Gordon, Springfield, and Rob Innerfeld from Eugene. I also see 5 callers that I cannot identify. So if I haven't called your name, would you please introduce yourself?
Can you hear me? This is AJ.
Yes, AJ from LTD.
This is Bob Courtwright calling in.
Bob Courtwright, got you, thank you. Anybody else that I have not identified? Some of those phone callers might be duplicates of some of the video ones that I already identified. So Commissioner Sorensen, I think you can proceed.
Okay, well, we'll certainly welcome everyone to the meeting, and thank you for staying connected to the meeting. And if there's other people that have questions about who's on the call, I should say MPC members that have questions on who's on the call, please speak up. At this point, I'd like to reiterate that we're calling the meeting to order. I'd like to move on to item number 3, which is the approval of our August 6, 2020 minutes. And the only change I had on that was that the minutes say I'm the chair of the MPC. I think it might be best to say I was the vice chair, just to be clear. And with that change, I would entertain a motion for approval.
This is Carl Ye, so move.
Okay.
I'll second it then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I heard Mr. Ye made the motion to approve the minutes with the change. And I believe I heard Mr. Councilor Piscinari as the second of the motion. Is there any discussion on the approval of the minutes? Any improvements, changes, comments? Okay, I don't see any, but I have limited access to what I can see. So, is there any objection? I just want you to blurt out if there's anything anybody else wants to say. Nope. Okay. So we'll go to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no.
Aye.
Okay. And the vice chair will call it approved by voice vote. with the change that I identified. And item number 4, I'll call on Mr. Thompson. Are you aware of any adjustments to the agenda?
The only minor adjustment is that for item 6, Brenda Wilson is not attending the meeting, so I will be handling that agenda item.
Okay, great. And then as to MPC members, are there any announcements or comments from MPC members as part of item number 4?
Commissioner Sorensen, I just want to note that Councilor Betty Taylor has also arrived in the meeting in case you're not seeing her on your screen.
Okay, thank you and welcome, Councilor Taylor. Are there any other announcements or comments from MPC members before we move on to comments from the audience? Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, and this is our public comment period for members of the audience. And anybody that wants to speak to the MPC can do so. We do limit our comments to 3 minutes. And I'll ask Mr. Thompson to call on the first person and set a virtual or real timer for 3 minutes and ask the speaker to take up the 3 minutes. And then we'll move on to anyone else that wants to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. So far, the only person that has indicated they wish to speak is Bob Courtwright. He is on the line. I also want to note that hopefully you all saw the public comment letter that he submitted to you that I forwarded to you earlier this week. So I believe Mr. Courtwright would be first up.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks to the committee for letting me talk. Just a quick introduction. Again, my name is Bob Courtwright. For about 25 years, I was the lead staff at the Department of Land Conservation and Development on transportation planning issues. And I continue to be very interested and follow that closely. And as Paul mentioned, you have a letter from me that comments on agenda item 7. And I just wanted to highlight the main points there. Overall, the recommendation is that I think the MPO is well positioned to help figure out how the region can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and implement ODOT's statewide transportation strategy. And the 3 points are these. First is that federal law rules and guidelines allow you to engage in considering a wide range of alternatives as you prepare a metropolitan transportation plan. As a matter of fact, the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transportation Administration consider scenario planning and consideration of a broad range of alternatives a best practice for MPOs. So there really, I don't think is any question that you have the ability to do this in your role as an MPO. Certainly you're not the land use decision maker, but that doesn't preclude you from engaging in this kind of work. The second point is to just reiterate where we are in meeting our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And that is, we still have a heavy lift in front of us. You did a scenario planning effort in 2015 that made significant progress, but it basically outlined high-level strategies. And much remains to be done to spell out how we carry out those general or high-level strategies. The third point is that funding is now available from the state. Just last month, the Transportation Commission amended its plans, its program to make another $5 million available to metropolitan areas to engage in this kind of planning. So I think you'll find that there is a partnership and resources at the state to help get this done. So I hope that you'll give that serious consideration today and going forward. Thank you very much.
Are there any other commenters?
Commissioner, I'm not aware of anybody. Is there anybody else in the meeting that would like to offer public comment?
over to Mr. Thompson first. And after he finishes his staff presentation, I see Betty Taylor has her hand waving, so I'll call on you, Councilor Taylor, at the conclusion of Mr. Thompson's remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, as you mentioned, the NPC bylaws do state that if either the chair or vice chair position becomes vacant, then NPC shall elect a new chair or vice chair. The chair and vice chair positions on NPC have to be a member from either Eugene, Springfield, or Lane County. And also the election for those two positions is voted on only by members of those three jurisdictions. Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County are the voting members for this election. We also have a tradition that's not in the bylaws, but has been followed as long as I've been here, where the chair and vice chair positions rotate among those three jurisdictions. Currently, at least up until recently, that chair position was filled by Mayor Lundberg, and this continues to be Springfield's calendar year, if you will, to be in rotation to hold the chair position. I have been informed by Springfield that they are interested in continuing to fill that position and fill the positions that Mayor Lundberg held on this committee. And so it is up to you to decide how to proceed, but that's the background that I wanted to proceed, or that I wanted to provide.
Okay, thanks very much. Why don't we proceed to some discussion or motions by MPC members, and I'll call on, well, first let me call on, have everybody wave their hands if they want to speak on this, so I have an idea of who wants to be recognized after Councilor Taylor. Anyone want to be recognized after Councilor Taylor?
I think Sean waved his hand, Pete.
Sean? Okay, great. All right, so we'll call on Councilor Taylor and then Councilor Van Gordon and proceed this way. Thank you. Go ahead, Betty.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I didn't succeed last time. Okay. I think it makes sense to let the vice chair remain as chair for the rest of the year, since it's only a short time. And so I nominate Pete Sorensen.
Is there a second? I don't hear a second. Okay, Councilor Van Gordon.
So when I agreed to sort of come on to NBC, when Councilor Pictionary asked me, one of the discussions that we had was like that rotation is something historically that's worked on well on MPC, and the Springfield position really was that if we just finish the year, we get back on the normal rotation, and then we don't have to worry about whose turn it is to sit in whose chair and how we rotate between the three jurisdictions. So with that, I would support, I would nominate Councilor Pictionary.
Okay, so Councilor Van Gordon has moved to appoint Joe Pictionary as chair. Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Mayor Venus seconds the motion. Very good. Further discussion? Does anyone want to be recognized on this motion? Commissioner Burney.
Well, I never want to interfere with an agenda to keep Springfield in power. However, if I was being Machiavellian, I might want Chair Sorensen to continue so Springfield could have the chair the entire next year. Having said that, I'll listen to the discussion.
Okay. Any further discussion? I don't see any hands. If anybody wants to be recognized, let me know. I don't see any, so we will now go to a vote. And Mr. Thompson, could you clarify who is voting in this?
Yes, Commissioner, the members from Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County are the voting members on this motion.
Okay, so I'll ask all those present that are eligible to vote to signify a yes vote by saying aye.
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 And thank you. And all those who are opposed, say no. And by voice vote, I am ruling that Mr. Van Gordon is the new MPC chair. And at this time, yeah.
Commissioner,
Yeah.
Councilor Pictionary.
Oh, excuse me, Councilor Pictionary, sorry. Well, I knew it was somebody from Springfield.
Go ahead, Sean. Take it.
And so at this time, I'd like to congratulate Councilor Pictionary and turn the meeting over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, folks, and thank you, Pete. So we'll just go ahead and move right along here. That's what I like to do in meetings. So item number 7 is going to be Metropolitan Planning Organization issues. First item is 7A, appointment of representatives to the Oregon Metropolitan Planning Organization Consortium. In other words, known as OMPOC. And Paul Thompson will be presenting, please.
Thank you, Councilor. Unfortunately, within the past month, MPC lost the 2 members that were its 2 representatives to OMPOC, Mayor Lundberg and Kate Reed from LTD. So we would like MPC to appoint 2 new representatives to the Oregon MPO Consortium. Note that the Oregon MPO Consortium does have a virtual meeting coming up on the 29th of this month. So that's why we would appreciate action this meeting so that there will be representation from this MPO in a couple of weeks on the 29th. And then I will also add that Springfield again informed me that they would appreciate continuing to serve in the role that Mayor Lundberg served in as one of those representatives to OMPOC. That's all I have.
Thank you, Paul. With that, do I see anybody with their hands for comments? Commissioner Burney?
Paul, could you tell me the time requirement of that position and the authorities of that position?
Yes, Commissioner, I'll try and summarize. Currently, under our remote meeting setup, well, first of all, let me start with saying that OMPOC meets quarterly. In meeting quarterly, there's not a set date. It's usually set from meeting to meeting when the next meeting will occur. Under the current remote meeting conditions, we have reduced the meeting time of OMPOC to somewhere in the order of 2 to 4 hours, trying to keep closer to the 2-hour meeting time because people tend to have difficulty attending these virtual meetings longer than that. That said, OMPOC's been around for more than a dozen years, and typically, and hopefully once again, when we are out of the virus situation, the OMPOC meetings rotate to physical locations around the 8 MPOs around the state. And those meetings are usually nearly full-day meetings. So in other words, we might meet in Bend one quarter and then in Eugene the next, or in Medford the next quarter, or Salem. And typically those meetings will run anywhere from 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. There is an OMPOC chair and vice chair. They tend to put in a little more time in terms of meeting with the OMPOC staff, and the OMPOC staff is LCOG staff. And the chair and vice chair of OMPOC and LCOG staff, as OMPOC staff, set the agendas, discuss the agenda items, prepare the materials. OMPOC is and then finally, finally, OMPOC is recognized by the Oregon Transportation Commission and ODOT as a participant in the discussions that happen at those bodies. ODOT does indeed help with some of the funding and organization of OMPOC as an organization, and they do reach out to OMPOC for formal input on items.
Got it. And when would this position expire?
We appoint the OMPOC members on an annual basis. So again, you could appoint these members to right now only serve through the end of this calendar year. That said, both Mayor Lundberg and Kate Reed served on OMPOC for a number of years. You would have the chance in January or the first MPC meeting of 2021 to reappoint or appoint new members at that time.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Does anybody else have any comments, questions, or motions? Mayor Venice?
We had, I'm grateful to Springfield folks for stepping up and say they want to continue where the mayor started, and I think that's a good idea. We had a representative from LTD as the other representative, and that seemed useful. I'm just kind of looking at Carl to see if there's interest by LTD to continue where Kate left off.
Thank you, Mayor Venice. I would, but my term with LTD is actually, my appointment actually ends this December. So it would put the NPC in a position of having to reappoint again. But if we're going to do so anyway, I guess to summarize, I would say I'd be happy to serve in that capacity for the rest of this year if that's what NPC desires. But thank you, Mayor Venice. I'm honored.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if you wanted to just fill out the term and then we can do a new election in January for the calendar year. That's my thought.
Yeah, I share the same thoughts, Lucy. I appreciate that, Carl. Any other comments? So I would like to entertain a motion for the first appointment. Anyone?
Can I put both roles in, or do we have to vote on the members separately? So I move that, and so Joe, I assume you are proposing to be the Springfield rep?
Actually, I think I was going to jump in and appoint Sean,
okay,
based on his availability, and plus we have a background in being caught up to speed, et cetera. And so we're working very close together, and I would support Sean being in that position.
Okay, so I'm going to move that we appoint Sean Van Gordon and Carl Ye to be our representatives on OMPOC.
I have a motion for Sean Van Gordon and Carl Ye to be appointed to the OMPOC committee.
Second.
It's been seconded by Joe, and I'd like to entertain a vote. Paul, would you take the vote, please?
Yes, and on this item, I'll note that all NPC members, Eugene, Springfield, Lane County, Coburg, LTD, and ODOT are voting members for this motion. So would all of those in favor of the appointment of Councilor Van Gordon and Carl Ye indicate so?
Aye.
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 Are there any in opposition?
Perfect. Looks like the motion carries unanimously for the appointment of Sean Van Gordon and Carl Ye to OMPOC. Thank you, Paul. Moving on to item 7B. It's revisions to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program Amendment Approval Authority. Should be Dan Callister presenting. Take it over, Dan.
Thank you. Yes, this is, you may remember last month we had a public hearing on this topic. This is a revision to the MTIP, the Metropolitan Transportation Program, both the 1821, the current MTIP, and the upcoming 2124, which has been approved but is not yet active. The revision is to expand the MTIP action approval authority of MPO staff to include certain MTIP actions that are currently being approved by the Transportation Planning Committee, which meets monthly. The idea is that in allowing MPO staff to approve certain types of common, some may say smaller scale MTIP actions, we could streamline the chip revision process, keep IGAs going, and get projects delivered in a more timely fashion, which is something that MPOs throughout the state are being held accountable for at an increased level currently with potential penalties for violating that may include loss of funding. So that's the impetus. At the public hearing, we heard no comments. Since then, a 30-day public comment period has concluded. There were no comments received. And at last month's Transportation Planning Committee meeting, the TPC formally recommended the MPC approve Resolution 2020-06, which would revise the MTIP as outlined in Exhibit A. I'm happy to answer any questions, but we're looking for approval of that resolution at this meeting.
Any questions from the committee? Commissioner Burney, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. You notice how we have to do this by title since we have the same name. If this is an inappropriate time, let me know. But my one concern about this is on page 3, if I'm looking at the right document, way down number 5 of additional considerations after a whole bunch of bullet points about major changes. I see nothing that's actually tangible that discusses decreasing carbon emissions, creating new jobs as it relates to renewable energy or storage infrastructure. Transportation is prime for that. So I'm just wondering, is this the right time to bring that up?
Are you talking about page 3 of Exhibit A? We're looking at the same document.
Yes, I think he is.
It's a 3-page memo dated August 24th. Is that the right exhibit?
I think it's attachment 2, maybe. Exhibit A, attachment 2.
Yeah, but it's not dated.
Okay, I apologize. That's what I was looking at.
Okay.
Sorry about that. The concern remains. I don't know where it's appropriate to bring that up.
Noted.
Okay, so that being said, Joe, were you satisfied? I mean, I'm not sure you got any answer at all. Paul, we have anything hanging here? I'm not sure. I'm uncertain.
Counselor, I think the commissioner might have been referring to a different memo in the packet. We will be discussing the RTP policies under a future agenda item a little bit later today. We'll also be discussing greenhouse gas emissions planning on an agenda item later today. That might be where those comments were directed.
Thank you, Paul. Sorry, Chair. I'm sure that's the case.
That's fine. I just want to make sure everybody was getting taken care of. Okay. So I would if we're ready to move forward, unless there's more comments, I'd entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
I move that we approve the resolution.
This is Carl. Yeah, I second it.
Okay, so I have a first and a second. First by Mayor Venice and second by Carl Ye. All in favor signify by a yes.
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 And any opposed signify with a no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Dan. The next item is going to be item 7C, which would be the Oregon Transportation Commission, or OTC, 24-27 STIP funding allocations. Presenting will be Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you again, Counselor. In your packet is my memo on this topic. If you recall, at the August meeting, Eric Havig from ODOT presented on the development of the 2024-2027 Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP. And at the end of that presentation, and also included in the cover memo in your packet, were a number of questions for advisory committees to consider in providing input to the Oregon Transportation Commission. The Oregon Transportation Commission is meeting later this month, and we will need to get these comments in either later today or tomorrow. There was some discussion at the August meeting by this body on possible comments. There was also some concern that there was not much time for providing input on what has been termed the most important phase of developing a new STIP. Determining how much money goes to each of these funding categories is the current phase. The Staff Transportation Planning Committee, your advisory committee, also discussed this topic, and in the cover memo, which the regional staff reviewed, there's a starting point of 4 possible comments for the MPC to approve for submission to ODOT and the OTC later this week. What I'm asking for today is for discussion by this body and approval of a set of comments. Don't need necessarily for them to be specifically worded unless you would so choose, but I'm looking for approval of a set of comments or topics to comment on that I will then write up and send in a number of forms via email and other methods today and tomorrow, so that I'm sure they can get in as soon as possible. I just didn't feel that there was time to try and get a physically signed letter by the NPC chair, given the very tight time frame that OTC is under. I want to note that the comments in the cover memo that as a starting point for you to consider today are to prioritize grant programs for local governments, which is the local programs funding category. In other words, it would be a comment that we want to see more funding provided directly to local governments through the local programs category. The second comment proposed is to prioritize the non-highway funding category. The non-highway funding category overlaps and sometimes with the local program category. And on page 4 of my memo, the 2 graphs, pie charts, I'm holding it up. I'm sure you can't see it on screen, but hopefully you can see it in your packet. The 2 pie charts show what was funded in the current STIP in each of those 2 categories, local government and non-highway. The third suggested comment to the OTC is that they need to determine now the use of potential of federal funds that would be received above their base assumption. This is an ongoing comment that we have submitted before and you have approved as comment to the OTC previously. And then the last comment that's proposed is that just again, calling out that we think there is insufficient time for us to really fully consider this as much as we would like. I want to note that the Lane Area Commission on Transportation, which you have a seat on, I represent you on, is also considering this next week at their meeting. They're also very concerned with the lack of time allowed for giving input. And so one of the reasons that I also need approval of your comments is not only so I can submit them to the OTC today or tomorrow, but so I can also carry them to the Lane Act discussion next week on your behalf. Counselor, that's all for now.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any comments from the members of this committee?
Yes, this is Franny Brindle from ODOT. I have one comment.
Okay, I have Franny and Lucy, and then Taylor. Betty.
So also there is an opportunity for individual members to provide input via a survey that Paul had sent out to all members, and I believe you received that last week. So, you know, please, if you feel a need and want to provide direct input on that survey about the funding categories, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Franny. Lucy, you are next.
Yeah, it just, you know, I'm always struggle with the acronyms and I just want to make sure I'm actually seeing in these pie charts. So if Paul could just walk us through on the local government programs. I think the non-highway is pretty clear, but the local government programs, it's all acronyms. And I just want to make sure I know what those each are.
Yes, I apologize for that. I pulled those pie charts directly from ODOT materials. And so I'll refer to page 3 of my memo where I tried to see if I could cover those acronyms under the bullet that starts with local government programs. the local government programs funds some basically ongoing things such as the STBGP, which is the federal funding to MPOs. In other words, included in there is the direct federal funding to the 3 large MPOs. The TMAs are the 3 large MPOs, Portland, Salem, and ourselves. If I'm going around that pie chart, the next one is TAP to TMAs, and that's the Transportation Alternatives Program to, again, the 3 large MPOs. The Transportation Alternatives Program is the program that tends to fund mostly non-roadway projects such as paths and trails and things like that. The third slice in that pie chart is MPO planning. And again, this is the core MPO planning that comes through from the federal government every year, and it passes through to ODOT in this funding category. The next pie chart slice is another one you may be familiar with, the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. And again, this is funding that comes to us as an MPO to fund projects addressing congestion mitigation and air quality. And then the next pie chart slice is the Local Bridge Program. This is funding provided by ODOT for local jurisdiction to address bridge needs off of the state highway system. In other words, local bridges, as it says. The next pie chart item, what is the next pie chart item? Because I can't read it. I now see that the color doesn't reproduce very well.
STBGP, that was the funding for the.
Yeah, that is, again, just the federal funding that passes through. You know, I guess real quick, touching on the intent of the comment on the local government program is mainly to increase the grant programs. In other words, a lot of what you see on that pie chart for 21-24 are required pass-throughs. I think I've mentioned a lot of those are pass-throughs of federal funds to either the large MPOs or all of the MPOs. And what this comment really calls for, I think, is an increase in local grant programs that ODOT can pass funds through to local jurisdictions, not just that basic required pass-through of those acronym funds, if you will, like CMAQ or STBG. Does that help at all, Mayor?
It does help. Thank you.
Do I have any other questions? Okay, I have Sean and Councilor Taylor. Did you have a question also?
I have a
Okay.
comment.
Okay, I'll hear from Sean first, and I'll get to you, Councilor Taylor.
So I guess my comments about the 4 points, like I felt like I saw these as they came up at Lane Act last month. I'm pretty comfortable with those. Really are the 4 broad topics of feedback, and I would just emphasize how important number 4 is for ODOT to sort of take its time and be really clear and get people on board with what they're doing. This feels rushed to me, which is not, which means it doesn't feel as transparent as it should be. And then I think the other broader theme that needs to come out of it is really we need to focus on sort of, local control, local input of how these broader projects work. And I think you see those in the other 3 comments, talking about everything from safety to safe routes to schools to talking about the non-highway funds. So completely supportive of this list, Paul.
Thank you, Councilor Van Gordon. And Councilor Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the non-highway programs should have the highest priority in light of climate change, and I think that's the greatest need. And I also think local control is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor. And I saw a thumbs up from Carl Ye as well. Any other comments from, Mayor Venice, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just one other question. So just to, I always struggle with the detail here. So when your displays how these funds were apportioned in the past. So do we have an option to weigh in and say we would like not just increased funding across the board, but we want a slightly different allocation and distribution across the? Is that part of the intent of local control, or, you know, how locked into those kind of percentages of the pie? How much flexibility do we have or control over that do we have as a locality?
Mayor Venice, if I can attempt to restate your question, because for me, you were dropping out a bit there. I believe what you're asking is if we are commenting at this point on funding priorities among the 6 categories shown on the first page of my memo, will we be able to influence within those categories later on? The answer is yes. The idea is that once the OTC determines how much funding to direct to each of these 6 high-level categories, they will then enter a longer phase of trying to determine what to fund within those categories. Not only programmatic funding like Safe Routes to Schools, but in many cases, specific projects.
Okay, so we'll have our opportunity in the future to say, you're responding really to Betty's comment about climate being important. We'll have an opportunity to say we want to, if we wanted to more heavily weight towards Safe Routes to School, for instance. We'll have that.
I will say, Mayor Venice, if I can, I'm going to be very frank in my response here. Yes, that is the intent in the process for us to have the opportunity to comment. Again, I have to be honest about saying that we have to be very on top of how meaningful and how timely that comment is and how much time is afforded to us to provide that comment, but we will do everything we can to make sure that we keep MPC involved in that and provide that opportunity. I also, to your specific comment and to Councilor Taylor's comment, I honestly don't remember if it was at the MPC meeting or the ACT meeting in August when Eric Havig was asked about how climate change would influence or be a factor in these funding decisions. And his response last month was, ODOT's still trying to figure that out. So there is more to come on that topic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I have Commissioner Sorensen followed by Franny Brindle.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to, chime in that some of these programs that we see as important to our community, such as Safe Routes to Schools, such as mass transit, such as non-highway alternatives to transportation. Seems to me that this is a point in time where we should be really speaking up for those, as well as on the topic of climate change, which I think is very directly related to whether we're going to get people walking, integrate public health needs. There's a lot of research now that shows that one of the most important factors in whether someone dies of COVID is whether or not they are obese or not. And with the obesity rates going up, not down, it seems to me that we need to think about the public health implications of what we're doing by building more roads, building more highways, making it easier for people to get around in cars and making it more difficult to get around on scooters, on bike paths, walk to school, walk to work, walk to shop. And MPC in its comments needs to be reflecting this rather than build your way out, build more highways, and then say, well, we are doing a little bit here and there so that school children aren't mowed over on their way to school, or people have to try to fight to cross a street like Highway 99. And it seems to me that our priorities are not really matching what the public is demanding that leaders speak up about. So I hope that our comments and those of the other commenters can really address this. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. And Franny, go ahead.
Yes, good comments today. The OTC is asking specifically for input on the funding categories, et cetera. So this comment doesn't directly pertain to that, but it does have to do with how we interact with the OTC as an MPC and in Lane Act. In the past, we used to provide comments and even priority around enhanced projects. And then we also had a lot of input on Connect Oregon projects. Well, Connect has gone away because of the funding. And then Enhance is that question of how much we'll actually be looking at for the next cycle. But other than that, when it comes to Safe Routes to Schools and the other non-highway grants, those are mostly decided by advisory committees who get selected for what project. In the Lane Act and the MPC might write a letter of support for a project, but we really don't have a lot to say about which one should be funded and which is the highest priority for our community. So we may want to say something to the OTC about that we have a little bit more control or input as to what projects that are non-highway actually get funded. Thank you.
Thank you, Franny. Those good comments. And did I see Councilor Taylor raise her hand?
No.
Oh, Joe? Did I see? I thought I saw something. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you saw something. I just want to reiterate what Commissioner Sorensen said. I rely on people. I have to. I have no choice. I rely on people whose work this is to identify the best and most impactful way to convey our sentiments. I personally can't keep fitting my square peg into a round hole and know where and how, etc. But I think it's exceedingly critical that if it's the will of this group, that we discuss where and however possible pragmatic carbon emission decreases that are net job creating. Whether we have authority or not, we should be part of that conversation and weigh in.
Thank you, Joe. And I saw Mary has her hand up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up both on that comment of Joe Bernie's and also of Franny's comment that I do think that could be, that we would like to add that as a talking point, that we would like to be able as an MPO to have more input into the projects that get priority funding.
Okay.
Particularly with respect to a climate filter, with you looking through a climate lens.
I see Franny's head nodding, so I think she's made note of that. Paul, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Councilor. I think what perhaps I could suggest is that, I could actually expand on the fourth comment if you approve these, so that it's not just commenting on the insufficient time in this phase to comment on priorities for these funding categories, but then goes on to say we really are calling for sufficient time and involvement in the next phase of determining how the funding within each category is applied to programs and projects.
I'm looking for I see Councilor Van Gordon's got his hand up. Go ahead, Councilor. Paul, was that all you had for a second?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually think that might be a good idea, right? Because Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is sort of really multiple steps, and each time we get to sort of refine the conversation a little bit more, right? So like we're going to get the blend between all these places. They're going to come back and ask for additional feedback.
They are. I'm sorry, Councilor, if I may.
Go ahead, Paul, and then I saw Councilor Taylor had her hand up, and I'll recognize you in a second.
What I will say is that I can expand on this comment as I just suggested. Again, speaking frankly here, my concern is about being able to do that in a way that will be as meaningful as we are hoping. We need to call for that, I think, in this comment period, even though it's really not quite that phase, as Franny pointed out, because my understanding is that the OTC is planning to gavel down on some indication of funding for these 6 high-level categories in a couple of weeks at their September meeting. And then they will do the next step of talking about some of the priorities within categories between now and December. So only a couple of more months for that discussion. And then it sort of goes away to ODOT for 1.5 to 2 years to come up with specific project proposals and specific funding recommendations down at that project level.
Thank you, Paul. And I need to recognize Councilor Taylor. It's your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a side comment. Should we be calling you mayor now instead of councilor?
Just call me whatever you wish, but don't
you
call
are
me
the mayor
bad
now,
names.
right?
No, not officially. I'm an interim working in her spot, and we're working through that. So,
Oh, okay. I thought you were the mayor. I thought you were going to control the world because you're now chair of Al Rapa and chair of this group. Okay,
no,
that's
ma'am,
all.
I take it as a compliment. Thank you.
Thank you for letting his desires known to the public, Betty.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't ask for any of this. So anyway, moving on. Paul, you got any other comments to anybody else before I go and ask for a approval for your comments to the ODOT?
I think what I have heard, and I guess I'll just ask for, in addition to any other comments, sort of affirmation of this. I think what I've heard is perhaps to emphasize first the non-highway program and get specific about our interest in those projects and programs that are funded under the non-highway program. To then, reiterate the remaining points in the cover memo and to expand on the last point to call for really meaningful input and time as they move into the next phase to talk about how to use the funding within each of the categories.
I think that's also what I've summarized from comments. Does anybody else, folks, disagree with that? Okay. So I see, we go ahead. I don't believe it needs, I guess we do need to make a vote or approve comments on this. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the comments.
I so move.
Moved first by Councilor Taylor. I hear a second.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Burney. All in favor, please signify by yes.
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 Any opposed signify as a no, please. All right, the approval carries unanimously. Paul, go ahead and move forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And moving forward, we're going to go to item 7D, which is the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan, or known as RTP, federal requirements. Paul, it's yours again.
So I'm going to be very brief, and then I'm going to turn the presentation over to Carl Springer from DKS. As you are aware, we are in the midst of updating the MPO's Regional Transportation Plan, along with a few other plans. But today's agenda item focuses on the long-range plan, and specifically what Carl will be presenting on and asking for discussion and feedback on is the updating of the policies, if you will, within the Regional Transportation Plan, specifically looking at how there are areas that the RTP needs to address this time around that it didn't need to address 4 years ago when we developed the current RTP, because there's been some changes in the federal regulations. So that said, I'm going to attempt to turn over the screen control here to Carl, and he has a PowerPoint for us. And give me a second. Let's see if I can. There you are. So.
Make presenter. Something.
Yep, I'm working. There we go.
Oh, look at that. this. There we go. All right. Everybody see the screen fair enough?
I do fine, thank you.
All right. So as Paul mentioned, I'm Carl Springer with DKS. I'm the lead consultant helping the MPO update their RTP. My comments are really pretty brief. I'm trying to provide as much time for you all to have your discussion as possible. The focus of our work at this stage is in updating the current plan policies. As Paul mentioned, this was done 4 years ago, but since that time, there's a new federal guidance in town called MAP 21, the FAST Act, and because that change has happened, the update at this point needs to respond to that guidance that's in place now. A couple other issues that are emerging that I'll touch on briefly at the statewide level is ODOT has been doing a lot of work in the equity and mobility area, and they also have instituted a climate change office, if you're probably aware. And I believe Paul mentioned that Eric Havig noted that. I think that group is still kind of figuring out how that's going to influence their programming process going forward. So specifically in terms of my next two slides are really breaking into two groups. It's the federal planning requirements, then a little bit on the state discussion. The piece that we need to tackle as a part of the RTP policy update is to move that plan into a performance-based, outcome-oriented planning process. And really what that means is we're going to provide more analysis and more metrics to help you all understand the benefits of the projects you're selecting. The last item you covered a wide range of different important values to your communities, and the intent of a performance-driven process is to give you more information about how that's helping in key areas. So we will be developing more new performance measures, which is just a metric. Think of it as a dial on the dashboard. I'm not an auto-oriented kind of guy, but it's an easy visual to represent. And along with that will become new goal areas and new targets. So sticking with the federal level of discussion, the 6 boxes there represent the topics that are to be addressed that are contained in the new federal guidance. So the topic of security, that can apply to the security of individuals. It can apply to the assets on the ground, and in a new emerging connected society that also applies to the data. A lot of communication systems are being used in moving people around, and that has, it's important to consider that as you're going forward. Preservation, both what you have today and what you think you might have in the future. The big new areas are the next few: the resilience, reliability, stormwater, how the system is going to be susceptible or vulnerable to natural disasters, and what you could and should be doing about that. The last one is travel and tourism. So thinking not just about the communities that are on the ground within your borders, but the people who use the system that started and end outside of those greater communities. How does that influence travel and tourism? My last slide is talking briefly about the state and local policy, things that we see are emerging, and frankly, you guys touched, I believe, on almost all of these. So we talked about climate and how that might fit into the process. Equity, more than ever, I would say, is a growing concern that needs to be articulated clearly in the plan, so there'll be language around that. The one piece you didn't touch on was technology, also known as those acronyms there in the text, the ITS or TISMO. That's basically a way of capturing the most capacity of the system that you have without doing expansion projects. So it's about efficiency. It's about gaining value in the system without doing your typical expansion piece. And the last, of course, is preservation for all aspects of the system. related to cost effectiveness. So I kind of blew through that a little bit fast. I wanted to set aside most of the time for your questions, so I will stop there.
Okay, well, thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mayor Venice.
I just sort of want to reiterate some of the conversation we had on the last, that this planning process offers really an extraordinary opportunity to use a little bit more of a climate lens as we're looking at our priorities. And climate is just one of the pieces there, but that has just been laid out in the presentation. But when I look through some of the packet, it feels like it actually needs to be a named category, that it's one of the pieces that we use to identify our priorities going forward. So I think we have an opportunity here with this planning process to really create a climate lens that we're using, and kind of build that structure for doing it more systematically and consistently. So we're kind of voicing that priority as we go through.
Oh, thank you. Good comments. And Commissioner Burney, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to agreeing with Mayor Venice, for conversation, I would like to question something that maybe I'm incorrectly reading into what we were just presented. It seems as if, and I don't have the slides in front of me now, but it seems as if the state is moving toward dealing with emergencies by the very expensive proposition of shoring up roads and bridges, retrofitting them, making them earthquake proof, blah, blah, blah. And at some point, especially when we talk new technologies, I would propose that there be the discussion of a different type of infrastructure. And it's an infrastructure where you have decentralized community structures, be they gymnasiums or church basements or whatever, that are literally retrofitted to be net zero plus, where you don't have to spend exorbitant amounts of money you don't have reinforcing an existing system, but you literally have a net zero. This is a climate lens we don't talk about, and it's probably getting too much into the weeds, and I'll make this really as brief as I can. You get into generating at these locations more clean energy than is needed, storing it for emergencies and frozen food lockers, what have you, and having them be local community evacuation centers that are far less expensive, decrease carbon emissions, and don't require huge expenditures to reinforce a dilapidated infrastructure that will not survive God knows what kind of climate or natural disasters may occur.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. And I see Mayor Venice has her hand up again.
I pulled up while the commissioner was talking, I sort of pulled up this list of the major changes to be integrated that are in our packet. And it feels to me like in each one of these, 2 new planning factors, improve resiliency. They don't specify climate and resiliency, and that seems to me the annual challenge for us. I mean, changing weather patterns and the impact, and performance-based planning approach. It feels like we could inject in there greenhouse gas reduction as a performance characteristic. Assessment of capital investment and other strategies. It seems to me we could include electrification in our infrastructure. To what extent are we doing that in capital investment? Consideration of public transportation facilities. I mean, that is huge in terms of electrification. If we're going to get people out of their cars, how do we? There's a climate component there, as well as obviously an equity component. And then this interested parties. I mean, that's the collaboration again. And then we heard testimony today from Bob Courtwright about scenario planning and our opportunity to use that as a way to use a climate. So I would just encourage this body to really like be more specific in how we look at that language. I mean, we don't, the feds have their requirements, but we can add our own lens there to those requirements. And I think it would help us really prioritize with the impacts of climate change in mind.
Thank you, Mayor Venice. I have Franny Brindle, followed by Betty Taylor, followed by Sean Van Gordon.
Not me.
Oh, okay, I thought I saw her hand up. I'm sorry. So Franny, then Sean.
Really good discussion on this. And I agree, looking at specifics is helpful. I was at a seminar years ago where the discussion was around construction and construction materials and the reuse of materials rather than going for raw aggregate or raw, materials, and how much greenhouse gas is really produced in that search of raw materials and the building of things. So there's a lot that can be done. Maybe to put a lens on all of these planning documents is, and I hope I'm not speaking out of term for LCOG staff or anything, but maybe having a independent group that specializes in sustainability and greenhouse gas reduction can kind of, or the firm that's looking at it right now, do another sweep through and see. I mean, there's a lot that can be done. When we do construction, do we need to build a detour bridge every time? Can we figure out a way to not do those extra things that end up not only costing more taxpayer dollars, but also have a sink in resources and greenhouse gas production? Thanks.
Thank you, Franny, and Councilor Van Gordon, followed by Commissioner Burney.
I guess just 2 quick points. It seems like this is early on from a planning process perspective, and at its basis, we've got to make sure we meet all the federal requirements to make sure we have a transportation system that works very well. With that, some of this discussion I think is really good as we get into the meat of this. It's going to come out and sort of be developed in a way that makes sense. I would just encourage people that this is a centralized planning document, right? And too much specificity is going to could limit us, right? We don't know if it's scooters or flying mopeds or jetpacks that are going to come down the road in the future. And so we're in this unique opportunity that we've got to have some of these discussions and talk about, all of them together, but also make sure we leave ourselves enough room to get to yes, in 5 years or 10 years time with whatever issue comes up.
Thank you, Sean. And Commissioner Burney, go ahead.
I would venture a guess it's not going to be scooters or mopeds or flying jetpacks. I appreciate the planning perspective to be general. I also see a growing impatience with generalities not getting to specifics. So I think that there's a navigation there. I would like to share with this body, depending upon where we move, that within weeks, the Lane County Board of Commissioners will be entertaining something that's spent a year and a half working on by county procurement staff, county legal staff, and county capital improvement staff. And it is going to be a template document which provides a lens which is more than just climate. It's also reinvesting in the community, creating jobs for local community people, et cetera, and careers. And I think that to the degree this group looks at this topic, it ought to be worked in partnership with what the county's doing. We're putting a lot of resources into it. You can leverage that investment that we've made. You can guide us. We can provide opportunities for you. And so I just want to let you know that the commissioners will be voting on a year and a half's worth of staff work that's finally coming to a head. And I think it could assist a great deal with the lens that we've been talking about.
Thank you, Joe. Do I see any more comments from the committee? Paul, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Councilor. If I may offer just a few observations on many of the comments. I believe it was Mayor Venice who noted that greenhouse gases emissions or climate change isn't covered under resilience on the federal level. I just want to remind you folks that when the FAST Act was developed, there was actually a separate greenhouse gas planning factor and performance measure proposed. And it would have been broken out as its own specific requirement of the MPO. And that was later withdrawn. They backed off of that. So that's why it's not really covered anywhere else in what you see, because it was originally going to be covered specifically as its own topic. That has been withdrawn. We're not required to specifically address that. That may change in the future, depending on politics and many other things. But right now, that's why you don't see it in there, and that's why it wasn't covered under resilience. Navigating through all of this for the MPO is a function of not only meeting the federal requirements, but also addressing the local planning desires, what this policy board desires, what the state puts in place in terms of a framework that this MPO needs to operate in. And we're in a little bit of a place that makes it difficult for us, only in that, as we've noted already today, ODOT has established a climate change office, but hasn't determined how they're going to apply that to the processes that the MPO is involved in determining funding and projects. LCDC, Land Conservation and Development Commission, is about to enter rulemaking, presumably later this month, on this topic, and will probably a year from now result in rules that may require this region, I'm not going to call it the MPO, but may require this region, whether it be the metropolitan region or Lane County, to look at greenhouse gas emissions and how it does its planning to meet the state's targets for that. So there's going to be specificity coming, I suspect, out of both the ODOT Climate Change Office and specificity coming out of that LCDC effort. But it's unfortunately probably a ways away in terms of the time frame within which we have to get this RTP update done. We are under a fairly firm deadline of May of 2021 to get the RTP done. This is by no means in any way to say that we can't address climate change in this RTP. We've got an agenda item a little bit later this afternoon, if we don't run out of time, to specifically look at the topic and a memo that I put together in response to some questions and some public input. But I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, I'm in a meeting.
Okay.
Right,
thank you. Betty, have your microphone on. Never mind. Councilor Taylor, you have your microphone on. So is there any more comments pertaining to this this particular portion of our meeting? Excellent. That was just for information discussion only. Unless I have an objection, I'll move on to the next item, please. This will be the item E, which would be the transportation options transition, and the presenter will be Ellen Courier from LCOG. Take it away, Ellen.
Hello, thank you. Is my sound quality okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of some background on our regional transportation options programming, and then talk about some of the changes that we're doing over the next 6 months, particularly planning and evaluation to kind of refocus that programming in the coming year. Particularly since there's some new folks on the committee, I wanted to just give a background around what we have been doing in transportation options. It used to be called Transportation Demand Management, and those programs were focused on reducing congestion on our roadways. The term has broadened to transportation options to focus more on providing distinct mobility options for community members, recognizing that it's not just about reducing congestion. There's all sorts of benefits to providing options for people to get around in our community. Our MPO's Transportation Options Program has primarily been housed at Point-to-Point at LTD. There are additional programs that are delivered through the cities of Eugene and Springfield. University of Oregon is also pretty active in our Transportation Options Program, given that they're a major employer in our region. So these programs typically provide information, support, and encouragement for community members to try different travel options, including transit, walking, biking, telecommuting, car sharing, van pooling. Those are kind of the primary modes that are promoted through these programs. Some of the programs are targeted more towards employers, such as our Business Commute Challenge, which I'm sure some of you have participated in. There's school programs. Safe Routes to School is based at each of our school districts in the MPO. We also have programs that target specific neighborhoods through Smart Trips. And then there are general programs and information that are available to the whole community. This is definitely not a conclusive summary of all of our transportation options, but that's just kind of some background on what those programs look like. And if you have further questions, definitely let me know. There's also a lot of information on the Point-to-Point website about what those programs look like. So many of these programs, as you probably assume, involve working directly with the public in some form. And in light of COVID-19, that's been very difficult. A lot of those programs are doing tabling events, working with community events, and those are all moving into a remote environment. At the same time, LTD has experienced significant budgetary constraints and some staff reductions. So the MPO and regional partners are going to take this time, the next 6 months, to evaluate this programming and the delivery of those programs. Our staff committee has put together a document that kind of outlines, it's in your packet, what we're going to do for this evaluation. It involves doing an evaluation of what are the best practices across the country. So what are other regions doing to deliver TO? Conduct a program evaluation for what we're currently doing and measure the effectiveness of those current programs and align those programs with all of our regional and local plans. Then one thing that we haven't done recently, so we're going to do a more focused public outreach to better understand the transportation needs in our communities. So that includes reaching out to key communities, which could be people of color, low income, other underserved neighborhoods, large employers, working with our economic development teams, with the overall goal of understanding who has access to these programs and who's benefiting from our TO programming. And then finally, we'll connect that analysis to our existing programming and decide, do we need to shift these programs? Do we need to have new programs? How can we align what we're currently doing with those gaps that we've identified? The bulk of this work will be done with MPO and regional staff, but we do have a budget to do some consulting work, primarily probably with the public outreach component of that. We also have quite a few planning efforts that we're going to try to tap into, including the RTP that you just heard about, the Lane County Bike Ped Plan. The UO conducted a travel survey recently. So we're going to try to tap into some of these existing planning efforts to try to understand the needs of our community and how we can evaluate those programs going into the future. So I'll open it up for questions or comments if anyone has input.
Anyone from the committee have questions for her? Go ahead, Councillor Van Gordon.
Just one quick comment when you're evaluating these programs. These fundamentally are really good programs. In the past, I felt like when we've delivered them, we tried to spread a limited resource over across too wide of the city instead of really focusing in on making an impact to one part of the system. So I just felt like the effort's been spread too geographically diverse for us really to see the impact.
Thank you, Sean. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate that. Moving on to item 7F, as in Frank. So it'd be a staff response to public comments on greenhouse gas emissions. Take it away, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Councillor. So if you recall at the July meeting, there was a lengthy public comment letter with approximately, I think, 24 signers on it, as well as some other public comments submitted prior to and during that meeting, all centering on the MPO and its planning for greenhouse gas emission reductions. The MPO, MPC discussed it a little bit during that meeting and asked for a staff response to some of the comments raised in specifically that longer letter. And what we put together in your packet is a memo that tries to address the 4 key points raised in the July 7th public comment letter. I'm not going to try and go through all 11 or multiple pages of my memo and attachments. But
I'm sorry, could you tell me where specifically on the agenda this document is?
This is item 7F. There is a cover memo and a number of attachments. Okay, thank you. Really what I want to emphasize, without trying to, again, repeat everything that's in the multiple pages of the memo and the attachments, is that the MPO, and again, we've talked about much of this earlier in this meeting today, is involved in considering greenhouse gas emissions. We're in a little bit of a strange place, as I just referenced, in terms of it not being a federal requirement, and the state requirements and the state rulemaking around it is evolving as we talk. But I think what we tried to point out in the memo is that of the 4 specific topic areas that the July 7th public comment letter touched on, there are some that the MPO is frankly unable to act on. The MPO is not a land use body, and the MPO does not have any ability to affect parking supply or pricing. But in other areas, such as active transportation, this MPO has done a lot. That was the topic of the previous agenda item in part. And we provide a lot of funding for active transportation. In the area of integrated planning and measuring, we wanted to point out that this MPO has been looking at greenhouse gas emissions for at least the past decade, was one of 2 MPOs in the state to do scenario planning a number of years ago, and is currently updating that scenario planning in terms of working on, updating the modeling and the data around that with the strategic assessment that we're currently doing. Again, I could go on and talk more about what's in my memo, but I would just be repeating it. So I'd rather open it up to discussion around this body. What we're really looking for in here is for you to discuss what the public comments were, what the staff response is, and what you might provide to us as direction on this topic within the context of either the long-range plan effort that we're doing or in other areas.
Okay, I got Mayor Venus first.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of this. I appreciate the testimony we had to begin with, and I actually am grateful to the public comment in this area, and I do appreciate the staff and how much we do. I guess, just coming from the top on this, thinking about it, we have had a conversation about highway funds versus non-highway funds, and I think, those highway projects are billions of dollars and they take a lot of time, and I know we need highways, and I know we need to rebuild them, and I know we are all dependent, especially these days, on trucks bringing us things. So I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't spend money on highways, but it does seem to me that there's an opportunity to say, if we're going to spend billions of dollars over the next funding cycle, how much of that is expanding highways and how much of that is investing in public transportation? And, we have a multimodal bridge in our Delta area being revived. I mean, it feels to me that there's a conversation there that is related to land use, because one of the reasons you have to expand highways is because you have growing population centers and you're connecting them. So it does feel to me like there is a place, even in the land use conversation, for this body to be a little thoughtful about what are when we're asking for funds to build certain things, what's our long-term vision? Not this highway needs repair, but what's our long-term vision about where we think we need to be? And it is land use, and everybody who sits on this body, the elected officials, are all going back to their own elected bodies and talking about land use decisions and knowing that transportation is this sort of one of the key expensive infrastructure pieces if you're expanding an urban growth boundary or thinking about how we're connected to communities. So we're kind of respectfully, we're not a land use decision-making body, but our decisions are very integral to those land use choices. And our choices about where we're going to invest in major roads are very closely tied to those land use decisions. And so I think that, it does make sense for us to connect the dots in our conversations and in our planning.
Thank you, Mayor Venus. And Commissioner Sorensen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that in Oregon, we have two kinds of land use planning functions. The first is what I would call a capital L, capital U, capital P planning. And that is the government's idea that we should have a commission, and that commission should have a department, and that department should propose rules that the over 200 cities and over 36 counties have to follow, and that our land use planning has to be done according to that. And then we have something else called the real world of land use planning, which is done by highway planners and bankers and other people that are not necessarily part of the Oregon state government's idea of land use planning, but both are very significant to how land is actually planned. And we're fooling ourselves if we think we're not a land use planning agency. We are the people that allocate by federal statute, federal funding within our metropolitan area. And we allocate that money, and it has a massive impact on how we are planning for the land use of our region. So we're already very involved in land use planning. Every decision we make affects land use and the future of our metropolitan area. And I think we need to get a lot more aggressive about asserting the role of transportation planning, which is a facet of land use planning. So, to me, it's just something where the hierarchy of MPC, whether it's the members, whether it's the staff, it has just been reluctant to acknowledge its major role in land use planning. And I don't know why that is. I think it could be because of the drumbeat of local control, because if you want to get rid of local control and have a centralized planning by the federal government or the state government or by a regional government, you're gonna take the view that land use planning is solely a function of a city or of a county. And I just reject that. It's just completely not true. That there are many, many different entities, public and private, involved in land use planning. And I just think we ought to be realistic about how important the transportation planning function, and particularly the federal funding of transportation, is in the future of our area. And I just would encourage much more aggressive use of our authorities and powers as a MPC, as a designated unit of government to handle the expenditure of federal transportation dollars within our metropolitan area. And obviously climate change, significant issue. Obviously land use, significant issue. We're very involved with both in the way we allocate federal dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. Do you have any other comments? Okay, I see Councillor Van Gordon followed by Carl Ye.
Look, I know that this is, and and I'm catching up to the whole conversation that started in July, I would just be very, very cautious of the fact that, that this body as a whole should become a land use body. Like, there's only one, we're not Metro, right? Like, in land use planning really resides with the cities, and you see that sort of in the staff kind of conversation, that each jurisdiction is sort of making changes, investments, whatever term you want to work towards greenhouse gas emissions, right? And we really need to leave enough space in this conversation so that we can have conversations with partners like LTD about how do you integrate, transportation and mass transit more thoroughly throughout the urban area. But B, that when we go back to our local jurisdictions, it's the city councils, it's the commissions, it's the people that are elected in those individual geographic areas that really need to be doing the brunt of the land use planning. So this whole topic made me really nervous that this could be an example of where we could kind of get sideways when we should really just come back to our transportation function.
Thank you, Councilor Van Gordon. And Carl Ye, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor. I have a quick comment and a question for Paul. Definitely, this is a complicated issue. I think there are a lot of decisions that we make that could have implications down the line for climate change and such related issues. So I think I actually like what Commissioner Sorensen said about being aggressive, and then whenever we have the opportunity to impose something or to further something along the lines to support climate change efforts, we should. And every little decision I think we make can go toward that. Paul, I guess my question for you then is how do we communicate this to the people who are telling us this information and keep them in the conversation? I don't know if you had a suggestion on how best to do that.
Well, excuse me, Carl, I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. We have been, there are many people involved in this conversation. Certainly the one that most recently we've been involved with as the MPC body has been the Oregon Land Conservation Development Commission, and the fact that they invited us to testify back in May, and MPC approved a number of comments that then Mayor Lundberg and Rob Interfeld presented to the commission along this topic, and the rulemaking that LCDC is about to enter on this topic later this month. We're going to hopefully continue to be engaged with that commission and that staff, because we anticipate one or more representatives on that commission's rulemaking advisory committee that, again, I think they're going to establish later this month. When they last attempted to do rulemaking in a related area a couple of years ago, I think we had 4 representatives from this metropolitan area on their advisory committee. So we are engaged with that. We are continuing to stay engaged with ODOT and their new climate change office. It's again just a changing environment and changing landscape for us as the MPO right now. One of the things that I think we should do as an MPO is encourage consideration, and I've already sent some emails to Carl Springer about the previous agenda item, encourage the long-range plan to discuss this to the extent possible and to the extent that MPC wishes within the policy framework of the long-range plan. But frankly, also, once that long-range plan is updated and whatever this body wishes it to address in the policy area around climate change and greenhouse gases, the next step is to look at how that long-range plan could then affect changes to your Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program funding priorities. The funding that the MPO has and that we've been talking about allocating through, excuse the acronyms, but the STPG, the CMAQ, and the other federal funding that this body gets to decide to use. And really, that is where that funding hits the road, if you will, or hits the path, or hits the, whatever you want to say. I don't want to put restrictions on it at this point, but I just want to say that that's where I think this conversation in the next year or two should lead, is to the discussion of the prioritization of the funding, not just the policies and the long-range plan.
You figured out what I was trying to ask, Paul. Thank you for the answer.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Paul. I just wanted to add a comment myself, as I want to reiterate what Councilor Van Gordon had indicated earlier, that I think it's very important that that this body needs to stay focused on its main job, and that we need to be cautious as to trying to tell folks or advise or force, or whatever word you want to use, other elected bodies on how to do or what we think they should be doing. And I think that it's going to be met with quite a bit of resistance, and I just want to put that out there. Yes, Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, I hear that. I don't think we're trying to get out of our lane here. I think we're really just trying to make sure we connect the dots. And, all of the jurisdictions, we talk about safe routes to school, we talk about transit, we talk about active transportation. I think we're really just trying to continue to connect those dots. And if those are a local priority, and we're a regional area, and transportation, obviously, it's a regional issue. And so the extent to which we can align along those priorities about safe streets and active transportation and transit, I think that's a high and important value for this commission to carry forward. And it may influence how we think about, some of those big highway projects, for instance. We may want to attach a different value to those. I don't know that, but I think it's not outside our lane to talk about it. And it's an important thing for our jurisdictions all to find some alignment along that, because we're a collective region. So I'm not suggesting that we wander off into land use planning, but I think that Commissioner Sorensen was very articulate about that the work we're doing, where you build roads, determines how development occurs. And so we are impacting land use with our choices about when we build and when we don't build, and what kind of system we build. So I agree. We don't want to sort of go off mission here because we have a specific role, but we can incorporate this conversation into the work we're doing.
Here really is to have the recognition all things are connected, and to include that in the conversation, being respectful of what our authority is, but also pushing for the government world to look a little more like the real world and be responsive in an impactful way.
Thank you very much, Joe. Any other? Oh, I see Councilor Van Gordon. Go for it.
I think this is really good conversation about where the limit and what direction that we want to go into. And I feel like it's really thoughtful and sort of intuitive. And I would just offer this piece of advice about how regional partnership really works. Is the most successful model for Springfield really is to kind of agree on sort of goals and leave space for my community to sort of, and my elected body to figure out the way and the how. So as we sort of navigate our way through this conversation, the most successful model for us really is, to not really get into the department of this is what you will do, but instead have a kind of a nuanced, well-shaped conversation about it.
Thank you, Sean. Any other comments before we move on to the next subject? Starting to get short on time. All right. Thank you. Moving on. So we're going to the follow-up and next steps. Want to go ahead and guide us through that, Paul? Starting with, I guess, ODOT. I suppose I can ask Franny.
Yes, Franny.
She checked
Franny,
out.
you're muted if you're trying to speak.
I don't really have anything. This is an ODOT update.
Yes, ma'am.
No, nothing. Just to talk about construction projects. They're all going well. Nothing really other than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Franny. MTIP, administrative amendments.
As always, in your packet, there is a list of the administrative amendments that your advisory committee approved on August 19th. This is for your information, and if there's any questions, we'd be happy to respond.
Okay. Let's see, as far as anything on the next steps or anything to build on the agenda for next meeting.
At this point, I just will say that we will probably be following up with more on the RTP, depending on the timing and the ability to have that available for the next meeting. We are planning, unfortunately, I would suspect another virtual meeting, so stay tuned.
Yes. And I do want to make an additional comment to Paul. Thank you. I appreciate your responses to those comments from the public, and they were very well thought out and put together, and it definitely looked like a ton of work, and I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mayor Venus, go ahead.
Just a couple of words of thanks. First of all, Joe, I want to thank you, for Councilor Mary, for stepping up and chairing this committee. Appreciate your leadership doing that. And Councilor Van Gordon, appreciate your stepping onto this committee and what you bring to it. I look forward to working with you on here. And Carl, thank you for stepping up to volunteer for the OMPOC leadership role, which, you know, is helpful to all of us, and glad to have you in that place. And then, just a word of, I just wanted to take a moment to thank former Mayor Christine Lundberg, because she was a valuable member of this community. She put in a lot of hours. She, you know, presided over many, many changes in this region and in Springfield itself. And, you know, I'm sorry to see her step down. And I just wanted to acknowledge that she's been a good partner. She's been important in the work of this committee, and appreciate the Springfield councilors stepping up and filling her shoes, and wish her, you know, the best as she goes forward.
Those are extremely nice comments. I have Joe followed by Franny.
Is it within the purview of this body to write Mayor Lundberg a note of appreciation consistent with what Mayor Venus just mentioned? If so, I would like to propose we do that.
Well, Joe, that's a great idea. And if it's not visioned as within the purview, let's make it within our purview. And I agree. I see a lot of head nods. Does everybody agree with that? Sending a letter of appreciation to Mayor Lundberg. Okay, thank you. And could you help with that, Paul?
Yes, I will work with Brenda. We will make sure we put something together. I'll also add that the MPO consortium is going to consider a formal motion on September 29th in appreciation of Mayor Lundberg and her service on that body. And there's a certificate and a little recognition being prepared for her from that body also.
Excellent. And Franny, did you have a comment? I saw you.
No, that was just I was just jumping on that last bandwagon. I wanted to have it.
Perfect. And Lucy, I wanted to comment to you. You missed my chat, so I'm going to say it out loud, because I sent you a chat online, and I just wanted to thank you very much for your support and your continued support for allowing Springfield, and your emotions to allow Springfield to move forward, and just keeping that continuity. And that shows a lot of mutual respect, and I really appreciate that a ton. So thank you. I think I started off on a great foot here, and I enjoy seeing all you folks again. Okay, so with that, I don't see any problem with calling this meeting adjourned. Any disagreements there? All right. You folks have a wonderful day. Thank you.